Okay, for this last section, all we need to do is batch render and then compile it and make our finished video. So let's go ahead and take a look in the render settings. And this is where we're going to start to set up the batch render, because what we need to do is we're going to create an image sequence. Before, so far, we've only just rendered still images. We have to actually render animation now, which means, you know, a sequence of images. So let's go ahead and look under the Common tab and skip over this color management for now. We're going to go down here where it says File Output, and you're going to give your scene a name. I'm going to call it Bouncing Ball. I'm actually going to call it Bouncing Ball 1. And then for our image format, we need to change this because this default, we're going to be using a program called Adobe Premiere to compile it at the end. But Premiere will not recognize this Maya IFF default. So we're going to have to change this, and we're going to change it to a Targa, because that's a nice big image that, you know, is going to save all of your image quality and everything, and it's going to be good for production. And then what we need to do here, where it says frame and animation extension, we need to change this to name_number.extension. And this is going to be important because, again, this is called Bouncing Ball 1. We need to put this underscore in so that there's a space, and then this number sign is going to be where each frame is numbered. And that's going to be really important for Premiere to be able to know what to do with your image sequence. And then the dot extension, the .tga at the end. And then down here in this frame range, this is where we're going to decide how much of this we're going to render. So it's right now it's set to start at frame 1 and end at frame 10. So that would be only about to here on our animation, and that's not nearly enough. So I'm going to change this in frame, and I'm actually going to change it to 95. I know that we have it set to 96 for our length, but if we want this to play in a loop, which is kind of the idea with this ball that's sort of jumping on its own power and playing in a loop, we would not want to have 96 come around and be right next to 1 because they're actually the same keyframe. They're both low frames. So if I just skip 96 and go up to 95 instead, then it's going to be a smooth transition and it's going to be a nice loop. Now, one thing that you might need to check, and you might not have put an extra camera in your scene. I actually did when I created this scene. But where you see renderable cameras, you have to make sure that you're rendering from the camera that you want to render to. So right now it's set to perspective. This is my perspective view right here. This is not what I want to render. So I would need to make sure and change this to camera 1. Because if you come over here and see, if I change this to camera 1, this is actually what I'd like to render. So you just want to be really careful when you're rendering things that make sure that you're rendering from the right camera. So, and you can, if you didn't make a camera and you just set everything up in the perspective view, just leave it at perspective and that's fine. But I definitely need to change mine. Then we need to make sure that we've already got it set to HD 720 because we sort of did everything with the background and that sort of thing. And then everything here looks fine. We also want to make sure to change this to production quality because we're doing a final render here and we need to make it look as nice as we can. And I think, let's come over here and check. It's going to the Bouncing Ball project in the images folder, and that's good. Now, if this is something that's not happening for you, if you don't get the right file path, you can always come up to File, Set Project, and then just go to where your project is and select it and say Set, and that will reorder where it's supposed to go, and it'll go into the images folder where you want it to be. We're always rendering into the images folder here because it's an image sequence. So this is ready to go. What we can do is come up here to rendering, or to the animation menu set, and change it to the rendering menu set. And then come up to render, and we're going to do what's called batch rendering. And I always just come over here and say batch render. I don't want it to close right away. And before you do any kind of rendering, you should always save. So I'm going to go ahead, because if you start rendering and then something happens, like somebody pulls the plug or the electricity goes out or something bad, then whatever you've done to get ready for rendering, you're going to lose. So let me go ahead and save again really quick. Let's see, make this bouncing 3. So again, saving sequentially is always important. So now we've saved, and now we can start the batch render. So I'm just going to click batch render right here. And Let's see, did that start? Not yet. Yeah, it looks like it's starting. If you want to check this and see the progress, you can always come up to Window, General Editors, Script Editor. And what you can see happening here is we're actually on frame 6, frame 7, frame 8. We're going all the way up to 95. And you kind of just have to sit and wait for this. And this is something that you really have got to plan for, because when you start to get bigger scenes with like a lot of stuff in them and a lot of transparency and reflections and a lot of things, this render time can get really, really high, and you've really got to plan time for it so that you can then put it through the post-production and finish it off. So, because sometimes things can take days to render. I know that I heard once that a Pixar movie takes a total of about 6 months render time. So you've really got to plan for your render time. I'm actually going to stop the video right now because we're just on 32 and let this finish rendering. And then we are going to talk about how to put it through Premiere next. Alright, so rendering is finished. You can see I've gone all the way up to 95, and it also says rendering completed right there. So our rendering is now finished. If I minimize this, and then I open my project over here, my bouncing ball project, which is, let's see, it's here somewhere. Give me just a second. There we go. And if I look in my images folder, I have just this huge pile of images. And this looks like it's going to be a mess to work with, but actually it's not. And the reason is because the way that we named this. If I go ahead and we can view this as a list, you can see that we have the name of the scene, which is Bouncing Ball 1. We have a space which separates that number from the actual number of the footage. And then we have this in a numbered sequence. And what that means is when we go to Premiere, Premiere is going to know that this frame belongs on frame 1 of the timeline. And then this is frame 2, this is frame 3, and it will run it together and play it like a proper video. So let me go ahead, and I have Premiere open over here. I am actually using Adobe CC, which is a little bit different than the Premiere at school. But when you get to a scene that looks, or a window that looks like this, you can call it the name of the project, because this is probably going to be the first thing that comes up when you open it. I probably, because we're not going to save this scene, we're not, going to come back to it or anything. I probably won't name it, but you could name it here. You could tell it where to save and say, okay. And then give it a second. And then the next scene, or the next screen that you're probably going to get with Adobe CS6 is when it's going to ask you about the sequence. So I'm going to go, and it's going to be a window that looks like this. I always choose HDV 720p24, and that makes sure that it's 24 frames per second. That's what this 24 is. Our scenes, like the actual size of our scene, we're going to use that to determine the size of this project, but you definitely want to make sure that it's set to 24 frames per second. And you can also tell over here where it says time base 23.976 frames per second. That's what we want. So I'm going to say okay. And then I'm going to go up to File and go down to Import and find my images. It's going to be on my desktop, Bouncing Ball 1 images. And then I'm going to just select the first one. And you have to make sure that you do this. Select the first one and then turn on image sequence right there. Because if you don't do that, it's just going to bring in this first image. And it's just going to be a still. And you won't have any movement. So, but if you select this first one, turn on this image sequence, that's what tells Maya, yes, this is a sequence. This is the first, the second, the third, the fourth. And it will bring it in as video footage. So if I say open, it's going to take a second. I can bring this out onto my timeline here. It's going to ask you, if this clip does not match the sequence's settings, do you want to change the settings to match the clip? Say yes, because we know that we've rendered this in the right size. So say change sequence settings. And now this is my ball. And if I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit on this so you can see it a little bit better. If I play this, you can see that the ball bounces. Now, sometimes when you play this in Premiere, it doesn't really play like you think it should. But you can also scroll through here and you can see what it looks like. And sometimes it's just a little laggy sometimes, and that's not anything that you can do anything about. But as long as it exports correctly, that's what matters. So, and you can even just sort of flick through here and just double check. But now you see we have an animation playing right here in Premiere. So you just want to absolutely make sure that when you have an image sequence that you don't skip any frames. Like if you start and stop at some point, make sure that it's all exactly the same, and also that it's typed exactly the same. So if I were to come in here and say rename this so that these zeros weren't here, that would interrupt the sequence and it would only bring in the bouncing ball up to 044. And then the next one wouldn't be there. It wouldn't be in the same sequence, and so it would cut it off right there. So you just have to be really careful that if you have a sequence, it's all exactly the same and the numbers progress exactly in order and you don't skip anything. And then this works really well. So now all we have to do is export it. I'm going to come up to File. Make sure that this little section here is highlighted and it has yellow around it because that's what we're exporting. We're exporting our sequence. So File, Export, Media. And you'll get this little window here. I like to choose H.264 for the format. That's going to give us an MP4. It's also going to use the actual settings of this size and everything to create the size of our video. It's really good because it compresses enough that it's small enough to play smoothly on a computer, but you don't lose any of the image quality. So I'm going to, here where it says output name, I'm just going to click this. And I'm going to find the movies folder of my project. It's really important that you put it in the movies folder because that's where I'm going to look for all of your rendered animations that you've exported out of Premiere. And you're going to call this Bouncing Ball 1. Oops, and you should probably type it correctly. And then I'm going to say save. So that's going to export this video into the right folder. It's going to be in the movies folder. It's going to be called Bouncing Ball 1. And then I'm just going to say export right here. And it's not going to take very long because it's pretty short. So we can probably just wait it out for a second here. And now if I come out to my folder, go out to my Bouncing Ball project, go in the movies folder. There's my AVI. I can double click it and it opens right in the media player and plays. And you can take this on your phone and show it to people, put it on your flash drive and play it on any computer that has the Windows Media Player or VLC or anything like that. And you can play it and it's a finished animation. And that's the first finished animation that we've done in the class. So congratulations. Thanks.